In this Black Myth Wukong video, we're going to be going over everything you need to know and our best tips and tricks to begin your journey as the mythical Destined Monkey. I personally felt like the tutorials in this game were a bit lacking, so most of this guide will be my explanation behind the core mechanics of the game, as well as some general tips for new players. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's start off by talking about the core stats of our main character and monkey, the Destined one. The main progression in this game comes from leveling up as you defeat the various bosses and enemies in each chapter, who will give you XP upon death as well as will, the main currency, and sometimes some special materials. As you gain XP, you'll level up, and every time you level up, you'll gain 1 spark. You can spend these sparks to upgrade the various abilities and spells that you unlock throughout your journey. The basic ability skill trees are the Foundation and Staff Stances trees, and your spell skill trees include the Mysticism, Alteration, Strand, and Transformation skill trees. There are over 300 possible upgrades throughout all of these skill trees, so you'll need to pick and choose which ones you want to upgrade quite methodically, since you'll have to neglect some skill trees in order to favor others. However, sparks can be easily respecced without any additional cost by using shrines, which are the checkpoints found throughout the game. When you die, contrary to many Souls-like games, you don't lose any of your will currency or your XP, and you're respawned at a special flag before a boss or at the last shrine you have visited. Now let's talk about stances and focus. The bread and butter of the combat in this game is centered around basic attacks with your mythical staff. You get light attack strings and heavy attacks for your bread and butter, and special varied attacks which are activated by using a heavy attack at any point after a light attack. Hitting enemies with light attacks will build up your focus on the bottom right, and when you fill up one of those focus circles, you can either spend it to execute an empowered heavy attack or use your special varied attack. You can also hold down your heavy attack to slowly charge up your focus to do an empowered move. As you spend more sparks in the Staff Stances skill tree, you'll gain more focus points to empower your heavy attacks for up to 3 times. The 3 stances in this game will change your heavy and varied attacks, but your light attack will be the same for all 3. You start off the game with the Smash stance. The heavy attack for this stance will do a powerful overhead smash, and is the only heavy attack in the game which can be charged while moving. The varied attack for the Smash stance is incredibly good, being a long-range overhead which has invincibility for about a second. This move is basically a parry, as if you time this right and get hit mid-animation, you'll be more likely to stagger bosses with the counter-attack, and then you can follow up again with another smash if you get the upgrade in the skill tree. Your next unlocked stance is the Pillar stance. The heavy attack for the Pillar stance will perch you on top of the staff for as long as you hold it down, slowly consuming stamina. If you hold this heavy attack down with focus, the length of the staff will increase, and at 3 focus, you'll basically be out of range for most enemy attacks in the game. Additionally, at max focus, the range on this heavy attack is absolutely ridiculous, making it fantastic for getting some damage in from a safe position. However, do note that enemy attacks on the staff while perched will consume your stamina, and if you run out, you'll fall onto the ground and get staggered. For the varied attack in this tree, you'll spin around your staff to do an AoE attack, which can be useful when fighting enemies outside of boss fights. The third and last stance is the Thrust stance. This heavy attack will extend the staff and execute a powerful far-range thrust attack. However, when you charge this heavy attack up, you'll have to stay completely still, which leaves you very vulnerable. The range on this attack is basically the same as the charged Pillar stance, so I would recommend charging up the Pillar heavy attack rather than the Thrust heavy attack. However, if you've already charged up 3 focus points, the Thrust heavy attack will be much faster than the Pillar, so it does have that merit. For the varied attack, it's somewhat similar to the Stone varied attack, as you can avoid damage with a tactical retreat after any light attack. You can then follow up with a really long range thrust attack for another focus point. Further upgrades in the skill tree also add a special thrust barrage attack, which you can use after the tactical retreat. Each stance also has some skills in their skill tree that can mitigate some of their flaws, such as the Pillar stance executing a heavy attack when running out of stamina instead of just falling to the ground. Moving on to spells, I won't go into too much detail as these can be spoiled, but there's honestly not too much to say to get you started. There are 4 different types of spells: Mysticism, Alteration, Strand, and Transformations. You can only equip one of each, so later down the line, you will have to pick and choose between a few options for each type of spell. Each individual spell will have their own skill tree within each category, except for the transformation spells, which will have skills that will apply to all transformations, as well as 1 skill upgrade for each transformation. My advice for spells is to stick to Immobilize and use it as much as you can against bosses, as it is one of the best spells in the game. You should also pay close attention to the upgrades for each spell in the skill tree, as they can drastically change how you use them. For example, Immobilize has an upgrade that will increase the duration of the next cast if you hit them with light attacks, as well as an upgrade increasing damage dealt if you immobilize enemies mid-attack. If you can correctly play around the upgrades for your spells, you'll see a massive payoff in damage. Lastly, for the topic of skills and skill trees, I think there are a few skills that you should prioritize getting first. By far the most important skill tree to level first is Staff Stances. Since beating your enemies with a stick is going to make up at least 50% of your damage against bosses and 100% against normal enemies, this is a really solid tree to spend points in when you don't know what to spend them on. You can always use your staff without having to worry about cooldowns or mana issues, so it's basically your normal form of combat. When you just start out, you also need to put points into the pillar and thrust stances in order to unlock them, making this tree pretty essential for the first couple levels. Upgrading in this tree will also increase the amount of focus points you have, allowing you to do some really cool stuff with the special varied combos and heavy attacks. I highly recommend maxing the varied combo for the smash stance since that move is super powerful. Try getting the varied attacks for every single stance. Apart from stances, simian agility and endurance from the foundation tree is also fantastic early on, as stamina is king in this game with most of your damage output coming from your basic attacks. The big skills in the stamina and martial arts trees to look out for are composure and punishing downpour, as these are also great for your bread and butter combat. The survival section of the foundation tree is also very important, as these skills will increase your basic attributes. Leveling up by itself will not increase these basic attributes, so you will need to spend some sparks to make your base character stronger. I would just focus on leveling your health and stamina early on, then mana, stamina recovery, and attack when you unlock it. Now that we've gone over the fundamental mechanics, let's go over vessels and spirits, which are some additional options to add to your combat. Vessels are very special items which are exceedingly rare to come across in the game. It's actually completely possible to only find one of the vessels in a playthrough if you manage to miss all of the secret content. Each vessel has a unique power, and they all cost chi to use, which is recharged by damaging enemies. After some quick testing, I found that it would take about 10 focus points of damage to recharge the full meter. A vessel's activation effect will be tailored to counter the final boss of the current area, kind of like Mog's Shackle in Elden Ring, and it will give you a nice passive buff on the side as well, so it can be used outside of the dedicated boss fight. All the vessels will have very different properties when activated, so you'll have to pick and choose which one you want to equip based on your own preferences. Spirits are much more common to find, with quite a few located in each chapter. To acquire spirits, you need to kill a unique version of an enemy, usually indicated by blue flames, and use a special gourd acquired from a character you find in Chapter 1. Most spirits will do some kind of unique damage move upon activation, such as whipping around a frog tongue, summoning venomous snakes, or thrusting down a magical staff. They also have their own passive effect for equipping them, which is arguably more important than the move itself since it's such a long cooldown. I would recommend choosing an epic spirit that has a good passive effect for the early game, and once you get spirits with more unique abilities, start trying to experiment with different types to see which one fits your playstyle best. Also, one more really important feature that you may miss is that you can upgrade spirits at the shrine inside the self-advancing heading in exchange for will and some materials. Definitely don't neglect this, as the frog summon can actually be upgraded to mythical tier if you have enough materials. Moving on to the more RPG side of things, let's talk a bit about weapons and armor. For armor, you usually acquire new weapons and armor after you beat specific bosses in the main story, but you can also acquire armor from random enemies outside of boss fights. Most armor will have a set bonus, a unique passive, or both. You can mix and match some armor set bonuses that have buffs for equipping 2 pieces and another for equipping 4, but some sets will need you to equip 3 or 4 to get a buff. I recommend just going for a full set of 4 when you can, as the bonuses are generally quite strong. Once you get pretty far into the game at Chapter 3, you can also start upgrading your armor at a blacksmith, which you can use to upgrade your armor or increase the rarity and defense stats. For weapons, it's a little more unique. Weapons are exclusively acquired from beating bosses and crafting or upgrading your existing staff. New weapon recipes can also branch out as an upgrade for another weapon and give it completely different stats and unique effects. It's also worth noting that you can always switch between the weapon upgrade branches given you have the materials to do so. You won't actually ever spend the legendary materials that bosses drop, so you can swap between all the upgrades as you please. Another item you can equip for passive stats are Curios. These are pretty simple, basically acting as accessories which can give some mild bonuses to stats or sometimes some unique passives. The best one for me early on was the Tiger Tally, which increases your damage after light attacks, which I found pretty useful compared to the other Curioses. Moving on, another thing that you can't forget about is your Gourd drinks and soaks. Your Gourd is your basic healing item. At the very start of the game, all it does is heal you with around 5 uses. Once you reach the Destined Monkey NPC in Chapter 1, then you can start doing a little bit more. At the Shen Monkey, you can equip a drink for the Gourd, and the drink can host 1 to 3 different soaks. So you'll have the original effect from the Gourd, a bonus effect from the drink, and 1 to 3 smaller bonuses from soaks. You can also upgrade your gourds and drinks at the Shen Monkey. Throughout the game, you'll find Luojia fragrant vines, which can be used to enhance the effects of your gourd. You can also find awakened wine worms within glowing wine jars to enhance the effects of your different drinks. Keep in mind that the cost of these upgrades are exponential, and this is the only upgradable mechanic in the game that cannot be refunded, so spend these materials wisely. I would recommend holding off on upgrading your basic healing gourd until you get the Jade Lotus gourd from Shen Monkey's store. For drinks, try keeping your worms until you get the lamb brew from chapter 2, since it can have 3 slots for soaks on the second upgrade. The last big mechanic to cover are the celestial medicines. These are quite simple though. There are a few throughout the world that will permanently increase either your maximum health, stamina, or mana. Once you get close to the ending of chapter 2, you'll meet an NPC who will craft medicines for you in exchange for mine cores, which are found randomly as rare enemy drops, chest items, and sometimes boss drops. I would recommend prioritizing health, mana, stamina, and stamina recovery for these pills, as the rest of the upgrades are kind of lackluster. The final thing I want to talk about before we end off this guide is not actually a mechanic, but just a reminder to look out for secrets. On the surface level, this game may seem very simplistic with its linear level design and simple progression, but it actually harbors some pretty hard to find secrets. In fact, people are actually still trying to find the last 2 endings of the game, even days after launch. I obviously don't want to spoil the fun for you, so I won't say exactly what to look out for, but just be aware that you can miss some seriously good content if you're not carefully exploring the areas. And that about wraps up our beginner guide for Black Myth Wukong. I hope this helped you out and got you going with the game. If you want to know our full thoughts on the game, check out our review in the description below.